Well, hello to everybody and welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is Massachusetts TNC's webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers and our partners from New England and around the world. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm Massachusetts State Director and your host, Deb Markowitz. Here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and also globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and planet. So we've got an exciting program for you today. We'll be chatting with Bob Mumgaard, the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Bob and the team at CFS are working to bring limitless carbon-free fusion power to market to combat climate change. And I know a lot of you out there have been hoping for some technological innovation that could really help us meet our climate goals. And this really could be it. So it's exciting to learn about. CFS spun out of our own Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it's now working to build a machine called SPARC, S-P-A-R-C. You're going to learn more about it in a minute. And this machine proves that fusion can work as a power source for the first time in history. After you hear from Bob, you're going to get a chance to ask him your questions. Before we start, though, let me tell you a little bit about our guest. As the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, Bob leads the strategic vision for the company. He also serves as a key member of the technical team, leading the SPARC design process and determining how it interfaces with the business strategy. Bob got his PhD at MIT on the Alcator CMOD developing techniques and has contributed to the design of several small superconducting tokamaks, which I have no idea what that is. Maybe he'll tell us what that is, for a variety of physics missions using high temperature superconductors. As a fellow, Bob studied the history, organization, and execution of large-scale projects in science and technology in disciplines including accelerators, telescopes, spacecraft, nuclear energy, and weapon systems. So he's got a lot to offer in this conversation. I want to just thank you again so much for joining us today, Bob, and I'm going to pass it on to you.
Great, thank you so much, Deb. It's so great to be here and addressing the audience. And we're a Massachusetts-based company. We're fundamentally a company full of people that are really, really passionate about the climate and about how we can simultaneously solve problems that we face in our environment, but also problems that we face with access to energy and the good things that energy provides. And so CFS, we're now a company that's about 160 employees, but if we add up all of the people around us, including our colleagues at MIT and at various institutions in academia and our supply chain, it's about 290 people right now, and it's doubled over the last year. So it's a very exciting time for the company. And the next phase that we're just entering is actually building a new facility in Massachusetts that we alluded to. It's both a manufacturing facility and also an energy fusion experiment to prove out some of the technology and science of this new energy source. And that's actually going to be built in Devens, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about how fusion could be a really big impact on our energy system, and also the plan to get there and beyond. So it's very exciting to be here today. Let me put up some slides. Okay, so we always like on our title slide to look at this image of the globe. And whenever you look at an image of the globe at night, most people are struck by one thing, which is where all the lights are. That's where all the people are. There's a lot of people on the planet, and they have a way of living that they like. But at the same time, there's a lot of dark space, and some of that dark space is places that we don't want lights. It's places that we want to conserve, and some of the dark space is places where there's people that we'd like to have lights. And so this, really shows the, the impact of energy on the planet and human and nature. So we always like to start with this. And this, it's on our website. It's something that we live by as a company, that, there's this balance between energy and the environment. And, that's not just true viscerally in pictures from space. It's actually true in how people study the Human Development Index versus energy use. And this is an extremely strong correlation around the world, that the path to a more fulfilling life, a healthier life, is through having access to energy when and where you need it. But of course, this has come at a tremendous cost to the environment in the form of CO2, particulate emissions, and lots of other things. And so the company itself is actually, recognizes this at a visceral level, and also has a belief that technology can be a solution to this. That we don't have to only look at technology through one lens of a panacea, or one lens as an avenue for destroying environment. We can actually balance those two things through increased innovation. And I'm going to talk more about the specifics of the technology that we're doing today. So now we mentioned the CO2. A large part of the CO2, not all of it, but a large part of that emission comes from electricity, of course, electricity generation. And if you look out from the EIA, Energy Information Agency, their projections of what the worldwide electricity use is likely to do, you get a picture like this, where we are in 2020, and it's projected to increase by almost a factor of 2 by 2050. But of course, everyone on this call recognizes we have to stop emitting CO2. We have to be to net zero by 2050. And various countries and companies have all made commitments to do that. Question is, how do we get there? So, the fact that this is increasing, this is a good thing. It means that we're electrifying more and more things. We're electrifying transportation, we're electrifying industry. We're giving people who didn't have electricity before electricity. That's all very good. Of course, it comes at the cost of where most of our electricity we get today is from fossil fuels. And we've made inroads, of course, in wind and solar, and we need to accelerate those renewables as fast as we can. But they also come with their own constraints. And so there's a vigorous look out in the future of how we're going to build this orange wedge. And that orange wedge might come from a combination of sources we have today, but there's increasing consensus that new technologies are going to be needed to make that wedge happen, to displace natural gas and coal, and also grow the electricity use. So it's sometimes easy to get into a mode of thinking that this is a small problem. This is a huge problem. It's a huge opportunity as well. And we think that it's an opportunity for innovation at the generation source, meaning at the source of the electricity, not just in how we move it around, not just how we store it, but also in how we generate it. That is a very, very big lever to displace the fossil fuels and grow the electricity base that are consistent with what we want to do globally, and things like the Human Development Index and sustainability goals. So if you look at what fusion might actually be able to contribute to this, I think first you have to zoom way back out and say, okay, what is fusion energy? So if we set aside our current issues on our planet, and you look at the universe, fusion is the energy source of the universe. So 99.999, you keep going with nines, of all the energy that's ever been generated in the universe has actually been through this process that occurs at the center of stars. And this process takes very light elements, types of hydrogen, and it combines them together to make helium. And actually, the name of helium is helios. That's from stars. We discovered it in stars. It's the ash inside stars. And in the process of this, it generates enormous amounts of energy. In fact, it generates 200 million times more energy per reaction than burning something. And this is the reason that the stars are not 5,000 years old. People were really confused. Like, the stars should have burnt out if they were burning wood. They would have burned out in 5,000 years, but clearly stuff is older than that. And when we realized that it was fusion, that it was 200 million times more energy per reaction than burning wood, well, that leads you to 10 billion, and that's how old the stars are. And so this reaction of fusion energy is it's not conjecture. It is the most common reaction in the universe. And B, it's the reason that we can have this big shift in scale at the universe level. So this is all kind of esoteric, but if you boil it down to concrete level on what does it mean if we were to be able to do this process on Earth, you get to a system that if you could build a machine that recreated that process that happens in stars, but on Earth, that machine would be a really, really interesting generation source for a whole variety of energy uses. And what that actually looks like is a machine, a situation like this, where at the output side of this is how we use energy today. It is the grid at various scales. It's electricity. Moving upstream from that, it's generating electricity through conventional processes that we generate the vast majority of our energy today, things like steam cycles. But then you get to this piece, which is very different in its same in function as like a gas plant or a coal boiler, but it uses a different reaction inside of it. And that reaction is the fusion reaction. So this is a machine that at the heart of it takes very, very small amounts of fuel, the fuel that is types of hydrogen, and combines them to make helium, and in that process releases heat. And that heat heats up the machine, just like heat that heats up a machine inside of a burning coal on a coal plant. Then you can use the heat to drive these other processes. And this could be true for electricity, but you could also drive processes for industrial heat, for things like desalination or reforming new carbon neutral fuels, or various industrial processes we use today that have feedstocks of fossil fuels. So the task becomes building a machine that can create the right conditions for fusion to occur inside of them. And this machine is a sort of a different way to think about energy. Everything in energy today, has really been about how do we find a resource and extract it, consume it, whether that resource is under our feet in form of fossil fuels, or whether that resource is the sun that shines on a piece of land or the wind that blows over it. It's about securing resources is how we think about energy today. When you move to a fusion system, it's no longer about that, because the fuel, as we'll talk about, is everywhere. There's enough of it. It's really about building machines. So machines that make energy. So it's a technology instead of a resource. And that's really powerful because it means you could manufacture these machines the same way we manufacture other things, airplanes and cars and steam generators. And you could put them into the existing grid today. They're sized right, about 200 megawatts. So it's not something that you put in a car or your house. This is something that you put at the level of a town or a factory. And so it's sized to fit into sort of how we use energy today without needing to have large ramifications on the built environment. When you think about the end result of doing this, you get a whole list of attributes that look really attractive for fusion energy. One, there's no emissions. So the output of this is helium, but it's not even enough helium to like run a good balloon business. It's very small amounts, and that comes from the fact that it's so power dense. And additionally, the fuel is everywhere. So one of the ways we sometimes visualize this is if we just took the water displaced by this oil tanker, and we just took about 1/1000th of that water, and we filtered it. And out of that water, we took about 1/6000th of the hydrogen atoms. So you wouldn't even be able to notice it. It wouldn't get any smaller. There would not be any less water. And you then fused it the same way the sun does. You would actually replace all of the energy that you would get from burning all this oil. And you would not emit anything into the environment. So that, has lots of knock-on effects. One, that fuel is everywhere. So that means there's no one to tell you you can't do this because of a fuel concern. There's no pipeline. There's no conduit. There's no supply chain that gets disrupted. Two, you build these machines, you can put them lots of places. There's not a geographic constraint. Importantly, that fusion process is actually the exact opposite of nuclear power, of fission. In fission, what you're doing is you're taking very heavy stuff and splitting it. That's actually a pretty rare process in the universe, and at least lots of complications. But in fusion, you don't have any chain reaction. You don't have any long-lived nuclear waste in terms of transuranics. You don't have any of the feedstock of fissile materials that you need to keep track of and keep in the right hands. So we think this has really big benefits. And it's not just us that think this as CFS. It's actually quite a big community of people that research this work. And that includes a lot of the science and academic labs at places like MIT and places like Princeton, national labs as well. And they're all trying to get to a machine that can actually create this process inside of it. It's a scientific challenge, scientifically feasible, but not yet demonstrated. And we're actually surprisingly close. So I'm a PhD person, so I can't get through a talk without having a graph. So on the right here is my graph. So this is actually all the data from all the fusion labs in the world that have built machines. Each of these dots is a machine. And up in the upper right is the point where you actually create the reaction that makes more power than it takes to run. So you light the star, the sun turns on up here, and we call that Q, gain. And this is temperature. These are in odd units, but 100 million degrees, so hotter than the center of the sun, is right here at about 10. And if you go up here, that's the lowest temperature that you need to get into this. So these are very hot. On the axis here, though, is how well insulated it is. It's very hot, but very, very well insulated. Stars are out in space, they're very well insulated. So you have to get it very, very insulated. We call it confinement. You have to get it dense. You have to get enough of it together. If you do those, you can actually reach more power at the end. And we've built machines that are actually pretty close to doing that. So over the last 40 years, the science of this has advanced faster even than Moore's law up to this point. And we're sitting just below the point where we can build machines that take more power at the end. Deb mentioned tokamaks. Okay, what is a tokamak? Tokamak, all it is the simplest fusion machine, the one that's most studied and the one that's highest performing. It's basically a magnetic bottle. And in fact, right now in the world, there's a big race going on for fusion energy to get across that line. And one such approach to show you sort of the breadth of what people are doing is this machine called ITER, which is being built in the south of France. And this is actually the largest construction project in Europe right now. And so it's a big fusion machine, and here's a person for scale, so this is big. But inside here, it will create the conditions necessary for fusion to happen, and it's a machine that's the tokamak. And this would be about a 500 megawatt machine, thermal power, so industrial scale, and it's under construction. But there's actually now a whole bunch of companies who are building smaller machines based on new science, trying to crack the code, if you will, of how to get fusion to work, and aimed at how to get commercial fusion to work. And they're using different topologies, different types of bottles, very similar to like how you do like drug discovery, portfolio approach of try new things instead of the tokamak. Tokamak got pretty big, but they've actually, there's about $2 billion of private investment into the fusion ecosystem today, not just from angel investors, but actually from industrial companies. CFS has investors like ENI and Equinor which are oil and gas energy companies. We also have investors that are deeply committed to sustainability, deeply committed to the environment, like people like Lower Carbon Capital and Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Gates and Bezos and others, who are trying to say, okay, these could be a solution. And there's about $2 billion now from that spectrum of investors. That's $2 billion in context. Is really, really small compared to the energy ecosystem, or even compared to like renewables, but it's meaningful. It's a similar amount of money as, say, in studying advanced nuclear reactors. So a lot of people working on this. And what the landscape, the way that we think about it at CFS is that we've got approaches that we know will work. We have high confidence in the physics, mostly based on tokamaks, but we've gotten big and expensive. And we've got approaches that are more discovery based, where we're still learning a lot. The goal is to move that very fast and inexpensive. And what we've done is we've really came up with an approach that we think could meet the middle, take the best of both worlds. And the reason that's enabled is because we actually invented a new technology unrelated to fusion. I mentioned that these tokamaks are bottles. They're bottling up the star stuff inside of them. Well, they're actually magnetic bottles. They use magnets to do that, magnets to insulate and reach those conditions. And what CFS has done with our partners at MIT and other places is develop an entire new class of magnets that are based out of new types of superconductors, material science innovation. And that we can build very, very strong magnets that are twice the field of what happened before. And it turns out that because of that, you can make tokamaks much smaller. You can actually go about 40 times smaller by doubling the magnetic field. And you can do that without actually changing out any of the science that has been hard won by all the research at labs over the years. And so we're actually now just getting ready to demonstrate the world's largest, by a big factor, HTS magnet that's at the right scale to demonstrate fusion energy for the first time. What that allows us to do is to take all the science and pieces that are inside ITER and put it into a much smaller machine, much more commercially aligned machine. And that's a machine we call SPARC. And that's the machine that earlier this year we announced we're starting to build in Devens, Massachusetts. And it's really a machine that will demonstrate more power out than in from the fusion reaction itself. Won't hook to the grid and put electrical power out. That's the next step for a commercial machine. But it's a really noteworthy experiment. That was the first time on Earth that someone will have generated more power than it takes to run from a fusion process. And so we're very excited about that. And that puts the fusion into a completely new context. And from this, we've been able to come up with a concrete set of milestones. First, focusing on the magnet built by the new innovations in material science. Then adding in the plasma physics that's from all of the work that's gone on to support ITER and the work that happened at MIT on the tokamak that is there, Alcator CMOD, that we worked on before. That's actually the current record holder for the temperature and density of fusion. Combine those together into a compact package that is aimed squarely at how can we go as fast as possible to commercialize. First, SPARC is a net energy fusion machine, which we hope to turn on in 2025, which is coming right up around the corner. And we're very excited to be actually out in Devens, Massachusetts, clearing the site and starting to put the buildings in place to support that machine, and also the manufacturing for the company to build SPARC, but also magnets for our future fusion machines. So turn that on in 2025. And then ARC, which is a copy of SPARC that's a little bit bigger, that could be a fusion power plant, just like I showed at the beginning of the talk. And that could be as early as the 2030s, early 2030s. And because it's a manufactured thing, it could actually have a fairly fast rollout. You think about how fast rollouts are for technologies that can hit the price points and hit the customer needs and also be manufactured on existing supply chains. It could be a really big impact to the energy system in not the next 10 years, but at that time, the wedge is going to get very, very difficult to decarbonize, which is the deep decarbonization needs to happen before 2050. And our hope is to go as fast as possible towards those goals. And so putting all that on a timeline, we've got outdoor CMOD, which has been completed. We're now demonstrating the HTS magnets, which is happening just June and July here at MIT. And then SPARC in 2025. And then this is the fusion power plant that we hope to build. And we're now looking for sites and customers to start talking to us to make sure we get this machine right. And find a community that is very excited about having it. The same way we found a community that's excited about having SPARC. And really develop this new energy industry, which is the next, we think, type of energy that, really the last type of energy that the world will use. So here's actually a render of the site that's happening in Massachusetts. This is Hospital Road in Devens, and this is the SPARC facility, which is prototypical for what a power facility might look like in the future. And then this is our manufacturing facility where we'll be able to build the key components for both SPARC, but also future power plants. And so this is an ongoing activity, just getting started in Massachusetts. And this is actually a couple weeks old picture of clearing the site. So it's a very exciting time for us as a company. It's an exciting time for the scientific community, fusion overall, and an exciting time, we think, in sustainability and climate as we approach this fusion machine. So I think with that, turn it back to Deb, and we can have some discussions. I'm sure there's plenty of questions.
Thanks. Well, I just want to first say that was really fascinating. You should know, folks listening, that I met with Bob and members of his team probably now 8 months ago, and you've gotten much further along in terms of your planning, and actually, breaking ground is pretty exciting. I know we're starting to get some questions coming in. It's exciting to hear about the power of fusion, and what a game changer it could be for climate change and energy. Let me just remind the audience before we start our conversation to, as you think of questions for Bob, you can enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So you can see it there. It's not the chat. If you're used to the chat function, it's not the chat, it's the Q&A function. And then, I'll try to get to as many as I can during our conversation. So, as I was listening to you, and, I was thinking about how, in Massachusetts, we're really working hard and focused on a very ambitious climate change plan, aiming to get to, carbon neutral by 2050. And well before that, having this rollout that is really meaningful. And the unicorn of creating limitless carbon-free energy is really the dream. And there is a point in every plan where there's a leap of faith that there will be technological innovation. So I am curious, this is exciting, right? Exciting science. And I assume similar things are happening around the world. I know you pointed out, one giant example. What are some of the barriers, in your view, that would need to be addressed in order for commercial fusion to be successful in a time frame that could have meaningful impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, the barriers are for this technology. First and foremost, there's still some technology to develop, still some things to demonstrate. For instance, no one has shown up and built a machine that makes more power than it takes to run. That's the clear next step, and that's where focus has been for a while, and that's the step that we're about to go over, as a company, but also as a scientific endeavor and field. Without that, you have an interesting experiment, but you don't have anything that's gonna make an impact in people's lives. Yeah. The consumer of energy, not the producer. So that's something, though, that we feel pretty confident worldwide that's not only doable, but that's imminent. And that's what the SPARC facility is really aimed at. But it's not just that. That's necessary technologically, but not sufficient. So then the next step is to make sure that we're on a path to put that into a commercial product, something that can be replicable, something that can be frankly built quickly, something that can be reliable. So there's always technical challenges when you do that for the first time. But we've also seen in the world that technologies can get through those phases quite quickly. Don't ever count out a factor of 10 change in how we've done something before, especially when you have something like the factor of 200 million in the fundamental reaction. So we'll be watching, and working really hard on making sure we carry the momentum all the way through to not just demonstrating energy, but the steps that are needed in a package to get to commercialization, and make sure that's scaled. In addition, there's also just things like this conversation where it's a new technology. There's an uptake time of people on how this works, how this could be impactful, what are the pros and cons, and there's an education component that goes along with the technical component. I think what we've seen, in the past is how important those conversations are.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about, battery storage being sort of a game changer for the renewable, world. And that was, it started with Tesla, right? With Elon Musk really investing in something very disruptive. And we did get a question about, where would these machines be located? Are they going to replace solar panels and wind turbines? And as you said earlier, one of the beauties of these machines is they could operate with the existing grid. And I would suggest, my answer might be different than your answer to that question. My answer would be, we need them all. We need all of the solutions, and we need to be doing everything right now. The value of distributed generation is that it ends up being more resilient over time to storms. Our old model of the centralized facility that distributes out through the grid is an old model that I think is no longer as relevant. That being said, we've got all of this investment, right, that we don't want to throw away. And it sounds like this is a solution to our existing investment in distribution infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And I think the idea that there are multiple problems here, and there are multiple solutions at different scales, geographically, different conditions. And as an energy person, the variety is so big. It's way bigger than I think most lay people, really have a interaction with. So, solutions that work in the central plains of the United States are not going to work for places like Tokyo.
Right.
But, there's a whole lot of environmental impact, CO2 emissions that come from places like Tokyo, or from, how you build how you make steel. So like even thinking about, okay, we should definitely build distributed energy sources, but the feedstocks for those come from very point source emitters. They come from places that are smelting steel. So how do you electrify steel production, and how do you put that into the energy cost into a sustainable energy source? And even in a place like Massachusetts, it's very interesting to just run the numbers. And you look at, well, if we wanted to power Massachusetts with just solar and wind, and we say we're a one source only energy system, it would have huge ramifications for all the things that we really like about Massachusetts, whether that's the Berkshires and the forests, or whether that's the high-tech intellectual powerhouses of places like MIT or the manufacturing centers. And so we see this as an energy source that's not meant to be everywhere, but is meant to be places that are very difficult to decarbonize.
Yeah, that makes great sense. We have a couple of questions that are on this topic still, because you showed the slide of the super ginormous facility, and so we've got a lot of questions. Just how big do these have to be? And I know you're aiming for something much smaller, but much smaller meaning what?
Yeah, great question. So the aim here is to have the power density, the power per sort of site, site area to have that power density that's similar to a gas plant, which, that's several orders of magnitude more power dense than a solar farm. So, in terms of total footprint, the advantage of this system is you get a lot of power for not a lot of stuff, whether that's stuff both simply manufacturing things, or that's stuff in terms of the space you need to take up to build it. And so that's one of the key advantages, and that comes from the fundamental reaction of, there's a big difference between collecting the light from the sun versus creating the reaction that's in the sun. But the sort of minimum size is, it's very difficult to build a machine, these fusion machines, say like at the type size that you would put in your basement. That's not gonna. That's probably not a good market if you want to make the big differences in the decarbonization for the very hard things. So these are systems that all the commercial companies are aiming at, systems that are in the 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt scale, which is sort of a small gas turbine. A couple of those plants would replace coal plants, and it'd take you about 5-10 of those plants to replace a nuclear plant. So it's in that middle space, which is actually where almost all the existing power plants are today. Right. Even like a grid scale solar plant, say out in California, where I'm in California today, actually, flew over and said, "Oh, okay, that's about a 200 megawatt field of solar panels. A fusion plant to replace."
Yeah, so it uses space differently, but we can picture it along the line of back to the existing infrastructure. So you want to close down that nuclear power plant because it's aging and it's a huge investment to, like Vermont Yankee. I know a lot of our nuclear infrastructure right now is at its end of life. And so there'll be a question, do you replace it with something else? And this could use that footprint and, bring the energy into the grid. We had a really good question that I want to bring up because other people may be thinking about it as well. One of our listeners said that she's still unsure how this actually works. So does this machine produce power that feeds into the existing grid? And as you described, and for folks thinking about it, like you can think about gas, right? When you burn gas, it creates steam, which makes a turbine move, and that creates the energy that goes into the grid. My understanding from you is it's similar here, right? You create, you create a heat that can be either used as thermal, right, to help heat the steel directly, or it can create electricity by spinning a turbine. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. And it's a really, pinnacle sort of technology of science and engineering at the heart of it. But, at the downstream, it's electrons coming across the wire. And the path to get there is not that dissimilar from the vast majority of how we get there today. And that's a bit crazy to think about. At the end of the day, you have this very futuristic science fiction sort of topical machine, but then it's hooked to the same thing we've been doing since James Watt.
Yeah. We've got a couple of questions that are sort of safety facing, because we all know about like nuclear energy that makes us a little nervous. Like it is in theory, carbon neutral, and yet it's dangerous and meltdowns. So we have like, what temperatures do the superconductor magnets need to be at? And I think that's heading towards a safety question. And that's Timothy Ingram asks that. Ingraham. Kate Tornberg asks, is there a downside? Can the Tacamac explode or melt down? And what about these things?
Yeah, I'll take it. Obviously it's a really important discussion. It's really, really important set of questions. So, not all energy sources, of course, all come with trade-offs. So in this particular energy system, you can boil it back down to the reaction itself. So the reaction itself is not a chain reaction. So that means that it's like something that you have inherent control over. So You actually in these machines, you fuel them the tiny bits of fuel they need, which is like literally like the, less than a grain of rice at a time into the machine. It's like that's enough for like an hour of energy. You feed them, and if you stop feeding them, it turns off. And in fact, if you want to shut the machine down, which obviously you do regularly, all you have to do is you blow it out. It's because although it's this weird state of matter inside there, the same stuff that's inside stars, it's very, very fragile. You've done all this work to recreate the conditions that are in outer space on Earth to be able to get to the star in a bottle. People sort of think of star in a bottle as like, oh, it's very hot, it's like lava. What if it gets out of control and melts or something? Well, it's not. It's actually has as much energy in it as like a boiling pot of water, and a single breath of air has more particles in it than the particles in the plasma. So you literally blow it out with it. And so it's this system that it takes a lot of care and feeding to keep it going, and because it always just wants to turn off, which is what you really, really like in an energy system. And it also means that there's no source to explode. Everything's at vacuum or atmospheric pressures. It's not something that has a lot of stored energy in it. There are some other aspects to it. It's like, okay, so it doesn't have the uranium or plutonium or the transuranics, which are the nuclear waste that you have to keep track of for hundreds of thousands of years, that you really worry about getting in the biosphere, and you really worry about releasing and spreading around because it's not going to go away. Doesn't have any of that, but it does still make some radiation. It makes radiation the same way that a cancer treatment center makes radiation, or an accelerator makes radiation, or those types of systems. But it's not radiation that sits there forever. It's radiation you turn on and turn off, the vast majority of it. And it does affect its machine surroundings. So you have to keep track of when you take the machine apart. You don't just put it in a landfill. You have to monitor it for a few decade time scale, but not 10,000 years. So it's that type of a footprint.
And what about the magnet? Back to that question. So does it heat up? Is that an issue? Because
the magnet's actually very, very cold. So the magnet is only a few degrees above absolute zero. It's very, very cold. But it's the same type of magnet. It's a superconducting magnet. It's actually the same type of magnet that like is in MRI machines, for instance. So it's something that you don't want to be. The public doesn't ever go stand in it. There's procedures to do that for the workers, but it's not something that can explode or do anything that's outside the magnet itself. Really.
So there's things you have to be careful about, but it doesn't create a generalized danger.
Yeah, and that's one of the big advantages of this technology is just like the footprint from a power density standpoint in terms of how much land and things you need to do. The safety footprint is, there are industrial hazards inside of this in terms of moving machinery and high voltage.
All the normal things.
All the normal stuff, but there's not these scenarios that have very large regional impacts.
That's great. That's great. And I really want to thank you and appreciate how you're speaking to us in plain English. As a layperson, I know the folks who are watching also appreciate this. We have another question from Lainey Thornton. She asks, is the net energy calculation based on the total energy in, or just the power measured inside the reactor at the location the heat is generated? Heat is low-grade energy, so what COP do you figure is needed to create enough energy to convert back to electricity and power the machine and create net power to the grid? And I think this probably gets to this question is like, does it take more energy to produce the energy? Like at what point does it become, commercial and viable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it depends on how you build the machine, but there is a relationship between the heat to heat the fuel, and where the fuel reaction makes more power than it heats it. That's the piece that's never been done before. And that's necessary, but not sufficient. You have to do that, but then you also have to factor in all the recirculating losses, right? So you think about like an amplifier. There's some amount of energy that has to flow through the system to keep the system going. It depends on the type of plant, but for the tokamak, which is the most studied, in general, those efficiencies are all very well understood. There are things like the efficiency to convert heat to electricity, things like the efficiency to of the pumps that circulate the heat, the fluids and pump the vacuum. All those are fairly well understood. And in general, if you can make about 3 times more power out than the plasma takes to heat, so the fundamental fuel process, which is the novel process, if you can get that about a factor of 3, then now you can start to have net electric onto the grid. For depending on exactly all the details, but it's around 3. And so the goal that we have is, first, let's get a plasma that just makes 1. But it turns out that by the time you're at that point, it's actually not that far away to go to 10 or 50. And that's you've got momentum behind you by the time you're starting to make more power than it simply takes to heat it. So for the SPARC machine, early on it'll be just a few times more out than in, but the same machine, we're confident it will actually get up into significant gains that would be above if we had converted it and cycled it above net.
Well, the reason why all this feels to us, speaking for people on this call, as really believable is because we saw how solar technology and this battery storage just took off. It was like an idea, that was an outline kind of idea, and now it's ubiquitous, right? And when we think about wind turbines, even, it's like there's more energy coming out of wind than coal in the Great Plains, and that was in a decade. It's phenomenal and meaningful. And we got a question from Brian DeVerne. How would the tremendous heat generated by fusion be managed such that it is not atmospherically additive? So that's an interesting question, right? When we make energy using heat, it's putting heat into the atmosphere, and we're already kind of managing, heat. But
yeah, I think there's 2 parts to it. So one, we can actually be more efficient than all the thermal stuff today. So just in terms of amount of heat into, say, the environment versus electricity. But also, really importantly, we talk a lot about climate change and global warming, and the global problem we have today is from the fact that the CO2 is such a heat trapper for infrared radiation. So like the actual amount of heat that comes out of our power plants, or all of the activity we do as humans today, I'm making about 200 watts just from living. All that heat doesn't actually contribute to global warming, but it can be a local problem. So it can be, if you put all that heat into a small body of water, well, that's going to change that body of water. And so, one of the advantages of that we see coming through the pipeline of innovation, when you start to build thermal plants from scratch, we can make different decisions than we did in the past. We can make decisions of like, well, let's not put it into the body of water. Let's do a dry cooling system. So like, for instance, the plants that we scope out, don't rely on large amounts of water being heated or large amounts of water being evaporated. You can do it other ways. It takes some efficiency loss in terms of the amount of fuel it takes to make the electricity. But because it's a fusion process, that's not nearly as important as, say, a carbon process, where that's a direct hit to the CO2 and to the extractive industry. And so you can make these different trade-offs that all boil down to the fact that this is a really unique source of fundamental energy, in a way that is never been done before. It's something that people are very aware of. And it's also the case that, back to Dad, you made a great point about how innovation has accelerated things so fast. We see that there's lots of innovations that are coming up that are as investors and others have put into new technologies and new ways to go from heat to electricity much more efficiently with less use of land and space and materials, and new ways to build even heat exchangers with additive manufacturing that can be much more compact. It's a really exciting time.
And so for folks who are new to this, when you have passed like a nuclear power plant, you see those, really, big towers. They're the cooling towers. And that's, they often use a water cooling system, and then they put that water back into the river, and it changes the ecosystem. And so a lot of the permitting conversation is about, how, and it costs them money to use the cooling tower. It creates electricity, it requires electricity to use the cooling tower. And so they make less of a profit. And so there's always this tug of war about, just how warm their effluent can be, how warm the water is that they're putting back into the system. And so you're right, as we're building new plants, we could rethink what is acceptable. And it sounds like there's some new technology also that could be helpful.
Yeah,
so
yeah, but in the calculation is very different when you're building a new plant than when you're defending a choice that was made 40 years ago before we really, knew what we wanted to do, and what the potential downstream impacts would be. So
yeah. So we have time for just a couple more questions. I'm going to give you a really sciencey one from Ernest Huber, and then a more general one. So what is the actual field magnitude in old-fashioned Gauss units for the benefit of a 92-year-old physicist, I assume that's you, Ernest, that you expect to achieve that is predicted to result in a factor of 40 in size? What will be the temperature needed, and what is the superconducting material? I thought that was a really interesting question because I had no idea what he was asking.
Great question.
So can you translate it and then let us know?
Great question. So the magnetic field in units that is actually that we'll produce is 20 Tesla on the magnet and about 12 Tesla on the plasma. A Tesla is a sort of a unit that no one has any interaction with, but an MRI machine is a few Tesla. So that's most people's interaction with any magnet that's of any note is an MRI machine. Your refrigerator magnet is like 1/10,000th of a Tesla. It's tiny. So these are very, 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 very strong magnets. It's about a factor of 2 stronger magnetic field than the existing superconducting magnet technologies that are the highest field. So it's a big deal for anyone who's in magnets, like, we're says Commonwealth fusion systems do a lot of magnets. The material itself that does this is a superconductor. It's called high temperature superconductor, and it's actually a ceramic. It's deposited, made through a thin film process that actually came from the solar industry. It's very analogous to thin film solar if you go back 20 years. So again, a knock-on effect of this, the technologies not talking to each other. So the magnet's really cold, but the plasma is very hot. It's about 100 million degrees. So it's about hotter than the center of the sun. That sounds really hard, it's difficult, but actually that's something that we can do today in existing experimental machines. And so the big difference here is being hot and also being really well insulated, and that's where the magnetic field comes in. It makes it much easier to insulate. Instead of making it big, you can make the insulation better.
Yeah, that was helpful. I don't know if everyone else got that a little bit, but the heat, though, that sounds scary and dangerous, although you've answered the question about just blowing and turning off the reaction.
Yeah, it's this, you can think about it, it's like 1 million times hotter than air, but 1 million times less of it than air.
Okay, there you go.
And so the actual pressure of temperature and density, those that are ideal gas law aficionados, the pressure is actually the same as air pressure. It's just this very mismatched state.
So we got a comment from Barbara Vickery, who says, it looks like there won't be time to get to all these great questions. The question is whether you might be willing to share some answers in the form of an FAQ later. This is hugely exciting and an awful lot to take in all at once. I would agree, really exciting, a lot to take in. For folks listening, we will be sending a follow-up email that has this presentation, and we can provide some links to additional information. And you can, Liz Alverson just put something into the chat box. You can follow Commonwealth Fusion Systems on LinkedIn. It's there, and on Twitter. And I think we just have time for a last word for Bob. How could folks learn more about this? And I assume you've got some materials and resources for them.
Yeah, and it's really excited to be here, and I'm glad that people are interested. And I think, you know, it's one of these things that is definitely a thing to watch. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but there's going to be advances towards it tomorrow, and hopefully those, you know, the CFS and others in the field, the MITs and other companies, you know, stay engaged in explaining what's going on and where it's going and what the context is. And so as part of that, you know, there's really good coverage out there in the media that's gotten pretty well considered coverage in places like the BBC and in Boston Globe. Actually, they follow us pretty well. So there's those things, and please do, you know, check out our website, check out our social media, and we'll, you know, be out in the community more and more as we start to build this machine in Devens and have connections there.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. I'll say again that we're going to be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days. Might take a week or a little bit more, so it's not going to be the next couple days, but sometime next week or the following. And it'll have links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. If you're enjoying this webinar, please do share them with your friends. Feel free to pass them along to anyone you think would be interested. And then you can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on both Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work. And also we'll give you updates there on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. And as always, you can see our upcoming webinars and sign up at nature.org/MA webinars to find out about what's coming up. And next Thursday, we're going to be having a Nature Connect webinar with the Museum of Science's David Sittenfeld and Northeastern University's Dr. Brian Helmuth. David and Brian are going to discuss their unique partnership to tackle climate change and also talk about how you could get involved. I don't think you want to miss it. It's really, it's going to be fun and interesting and also practical about what you can be doing. So I just want to thank you again, Bob, for your great presentation. You did a fabulous job. I'm more excited now than the first time we met, seeing the progress. And I want to thank you all out there for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Take care.